In this lecture, we're going to look at special classifications for functions. So we previously saw what a function is. It's a rule that assigns to every input a unique output. However, we can further classify functions based on certain properties. So the first two properties we'll look at are increasing and decreasing. So increasing, decreasing functions. So we say that a function f is increasing if, so here is the definition. So if f of x1 is less than f of x2 whenever x1 is less than x2. So in other words, the function's outputs must increase whenever the x values become greater. Right? So we can look at an example of this. Here's xy. And here's a graph y is equal to f of x, and this is an increasing function. So if we pick any two x values on the domain such that x2 is larger than x1, and we evaluate f of x1 and f of x2, f of x1 is going to have this y value. So this is f of x1. F of x2 has this y value over here. So f of x2 is clearly larger than f of x1, and that's true whenever x2 is larger than x1. So whenever you compare 2 points in your domain, and you look at the larger of the 2 points, so you have a smaller point and a larger point, the output at the larger point has to be greater than the output at the smaller point, and that's an increasing function. So increasing functions are functions that grow, or they move upward as you move left to right. So this would be a typical graph of an increasing function. And then a decreasing function is just the opposite. So let's take a look. Definition: a function f is decreasing. We say if f of x1, so let's see, if it's decreasing, it's going to be greater than f of x2 whenever x1 is less than x2. So in this case, we have x1 and x2, and the function's moving downhill like that. So f of x1, is like that, and then f of x2, this is the output here, f of x2. See that f of x1 is larger than f of x2. So as you move from left to right, the outputs are decreasing. So the next definition, and this is kind of an intuitive or conceptual definition for the moment. There is a more technical definition that we'll see later on when we discuss limits, but for now this will suffice. So a function is continuous. So if it has no poles or jumps. In other words, i.e., if you can trace it without lifting up your pencil. So let's do an example. So here's y and here's x. So notice that I'm moving, and I never picked up my pencil when I drew out this function. So this is a continuous function. There are some jagged edges to it. So we say it's not smooth. Smooth means there are no jagged edges, but continuous just means you can trace the whole thing out without lifting up your pencil. Let's see an example in which a function is not continuous. So let's do a non-example. So let's do a function that starts out looking continuous, but then there's a gap, there's a jump like that. So here's y is equal to f of x. And maybe at this single point we have the output right here. Let's say this is 10, this is 7, 9, and 5. So what we're seeing is that f of 10 is equal to 7. Although f of 9.99999 is going to be close to 9, so maybe it's equal to 8.97299, something like that. So as you're approaching 10 from the left, so if you have a number just slightly less than 10, your output will be very, very close to 9. But then suddenly it jumps. It just jumps discontinuously from 9 to 7. If you just look at the points, the outputs, or the function to the left of this line, so you ignore x is equal to 10, you ignore all the numbers larger than 10, you would expect that this function would have f of 10 is equal to 9. But indeed, f of 10 just jumps down to 7. And then when you go a hair to the right, if you'd say f of 10.000001, you're going to get a number that's close to 5. So this is a discontinuous function. And we call this a jump in the function. Another example might be just a function that looks like a regular function, but it has a hole in it. So this function would be, so let's say this is x is equal to 8. So this function f is discontinuous. Or you can say it's discontinuous at the point x is equal to 8. So it's also correct to say it's discontinuous at x is equal to 8. Now, just because a function is discontinuous doesn't mean that it can't be continuous on a portion of its domain. So you could also make the statement that it's continuous between 5 and 7, because on the domain from 5 to 7, the function is in fact continuous. So let's go back to an example we saw in a previous lecture where x of t is the position of a particle as a function of time. So in this case, let's say it's the position of a car driving along a highway, at time t. So here the position could be the mile marker, for example. Let's say it's driving in the direction of increasing mile marker. So under what conditions is x of t an increasing function? Well, first of all, they would have to be driving in the direction of the highway in which the mile markers are increasing. So let's say the mile markers should be increasing in their direction. So that's kind of a given. They have to be driving in the correct direction. Secondly, they can't ever backtrack, so they cannot backtrack. So if they stop and they put their car in reverse, maybe some luggage falls off from the top of their car that they mounted on the roof. They stop, slam the brakes, they go into reverse, back up. X of t would no longer be an increasing function because they would be losing some of their position. Their position would be decreasing instead of increasing. And also they cannot stop. So even aside from going into reverse or turning around and going the other way, which I'd recommend never to do, you cannot stop, because if you stop, it's no longer an increasing function. So if they're pulled over by a police officer for speeding and they stop their car, then the function is no longer increasing.